Richie, I had to have you for Mystik Dan because I feel like the only reason we're talking about Mystik Dan is a brilliant ride from a jockey, Brian Hernandez. Mig, what did you think about Mystik Dan and Brian Hernandez's ride on Mystik Dan in the Southwest?
Well, I think it was a brilliant ride, which is a consistent trait from Brian Hernandez. I mean, if you watch him ride on a daily basis, day in, day out, he gives his horses every opportunity. He identifies track biases quickly. He's not afraid to ride the inside. I think he's one of the least well-known top riders in the country. For my money, he's top 5 in the country. He chooses to ply his trade in the, Churchill Downs, Kentucky, the Midwest. He could go any place and be a winner. Mystik Dan's run was terrific, definitely aided by that inside trip at Oaklawn Park. But I will say this, it was also the first time they took him back and they, kind of used his speed in a different way. And I'm always of the belief that all top horses possess one similar characteristic. They possess speed. It's how they learn how to dole out that speed that will distinguish them going forward if they're able to stay classic distances, if they're going to be a true top horse.
Well, Mick, I think for people who, it's the Kentucky Derby, we get a lot of new viewers and listeners. Explain bias from a jockey's perspective when you're trying to identify those parts of the racetrack that may or may not be advantageous to be on. It feels like Brian found Mystik Dan on the good part of the racetrack, that on the inside. How would you explain how bias kind of works in racing?
I think the best way for someone that, isn't a purist, follows races, is obviously like we do, it's our living, is you're at the airport and you're walking along, and then you catch one of those moving sidewalks, right? And all of a sudden you hit that, and your pace obviously picks up, and now you're walking on that sidewalk that's ushering you along. You're going to hit a spot where you're just on a firmer part of the track, where a horse is going to run over the top of the ground more. They're not going to get bogged down in deeper going. For years at Belmont Park, it was always the outside was the place to be. The Belmont balcony move. You wanted to be 5 or 6 wide. We've seen more prominent lately inside biases where, like Oaklawn Park, when Mystik Dan won under Brian, the inside was the place to be. He was able to get to that position. So now, not only are you saving ground, you're on the moving sidewalk. It was a perfect storm, but he still had a horse with enough ability to get where he needed to be, and then enough finish under him to get the job done.
Meg, I'm of the belief when it comes to Mystik Dan that his run in the Southwest, although it was a brilliant ride by Brian Hernandez, was bias aided. And that was his best race on paper that we've seen from him. And if he were to be able to duplicate that effort, then I think he could potentially get involved in this Kentucky Derby. My fear is that it was bias aided. And when we came back in the Rebel, it kind of seemed to take a step back and kind of revert back to what his normal performance was. What is your overall view on Mystik Dan as a whole? Do you think that he's a horse that can win the Kentucky Derby, get involved, hit the board, or do you think that maybe that performance is a little bit dressed up?
Well, I do think the performance is somewhat dressed up because of the incredible ride by Brian. But I also will say this, who's to say that Churchill Downs won't have a similar kind of bias on Derby Day? That's something we won't know until we get to the day of and pay attention to the early races. And then you've got the right rider familiar with Churchill Downs to take advantage of it. And you've got a horse that's shifty, a horse that can make multiple moves. A lot of horses have one move in them. Really good horses have two. Great horses have multiple moves in them. They can stop and start. Mystik Dan showed the ability to kind of stop and start. I think what it'll boil down to is what kind of price are you willing to take that he could work out another brilliant trip and take advantage if there is a bias that we've identified before the Kentucky Derby. That, for me, he'd have to be a bigger price, than normal for me to think he can work out a similar trip and take advantage of all of those things.
These mini pods are brought to you by Free Reign Coffee Company. They've been powering the In the Money team throughout the Triple Crown prep season, and the coffee is fantastic. Whether you're looking for whole beans, grounds, or pods, Free Rein give you what you need to get up and get after it. And they've got subscriptions available too, so you never run out. Use our promo code MONEY20 for a 20% discount site-wide over at freereigncoffee.com. During Kentucky Derby week, you can get $10 money back if your win selection runs second or third. For all the information, check out twinspires.com.
Megan, I'd be remiss if I had you on here and I didn't let you tell us who you do like in the Derby, because I think you have one of the greatest opinions looking at horse flesh, how horses move, evaluating races from all your time as a champion rider. Who's got your attention so far? I've got to see the draw, but so far, who's got your attention for the Kentucky Derby?
Well, I'm sorry I don't have notes in front of me, but the horse that worked this morning, is, I think Quiet Maria, is that?
Honor
Does
Maria.
that sound
Yep.
right?
Honor Marie. Honor Marie.
Honor Maria. That horse to me looks like a horse that's just getting really good at the right time. I don't know if the horse is good enough, but I do think that horse will really perform come Derby Day. Sierra Leone, I think we could potentially see a pretty heated pace. Sierra Leone's got a great deal of ability. One thing that worries me about him is he has a tendency to want to lug in a little bit. And if you watch head-ons of his races, he's got that paddling action. And I think that's what kind of, the lack of impeccable mechanics in his stride kind of makes him want to lug in. And you'd hate to have to correct a horse the last eighth of a mile in the Derby if it's close, because when you correct a horse, you have to slow them down a step. Obviously, Fierceness is brilliant, but Fierceness is going to have to show that he's a horse that can overcome adversity, and he has not shown that yet. In a 20-horse field, can you count on getting either the lead the right way or laying second or third in the clear the right way? I mean, I think he has shown that he has the most natural ability. Now he has to show that he can overcome adversity.
Mig, it's always a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
Look forward to it, Jonathan.